title of my slide applies, I will be chatting with you all a little bit about possible mechanisms that influence the effect of urbanization on Darwin's finches and their invasive parasites. Because this is like such a casual talk, like at any point, just like you can interrupt me and ask any questions. Alrighty. But before I get into the nitty-gritty details of the work that we do, I think it's important to talk about something that we all know a thing or two about. If the slide will. I don't know why it's not.
Still working?
Yeah. There we go. So yeah, let's start with something that we all know a thing or two about, which are humans. In the past few centuries, we've seen this exponential increase in the number of humans, as showcased in this graph. We have on the x-axis the number of years before the present. So we're moving from past to present, moving to the right, and populations in the millions. And we see this just dramatic increase in the number of humans in this world. And with any dramatic increase in the number of humans of any species, we inevitably see changes in the natural environment around us. One of the ways that this rise in human activity is affecting the natural environment is indirectly via the movement of humans. There are more humans around, there's more movement of humans around the world. And currently, because of the advances in technology, we have cars, we have planes, trains. Our world is as physically interconnected as it's ever been. And while that might come with benefits to the economy, globalization as a whole, it also comes with a byproduct because humans inevitably will, accidentally or not, introduce new species to areas where they previously did not exist. And these novel species can sometimes cause problems to the environments where they are introduced. One of the species that can be introduced to natural habitats are parasites. And we've already seen the negative impact that these parasite introductions can have on populations of species that were not previously exposed to the parasite. A classic example of this is in the ecology world is with the introduction of avian malaria. So there's the malaria that affects humans, but there's also a malarial strain or a parasite strain that affects birds specifically. And this parasite was introduced to the Hawaiian Islands via the introduction of the mosquito that transmits it. And it has caused it's in part causing the declines of these group of birds that are only found in the Hawaiian Islands. There are approximately, if I remember correctly, 14 extinctions of these birds in the Hawaiian Islands, in part because of the introduction of avian malaria. Another example of a new parasite that is affecting species is this fungal pathogen that affects different crayfish species, so like lobsters, for example. And it is also causing big population declines in these crawfish, even those that are of economic importance. High population decline. Another way that humans are altering the natural environment is via urbanization. So urbanization is this process by which humans physically alter the natural landscapes that they're in. And whenever you alter a natural landscape, you inevitably interfere with ecological processes, such as interactions between species. One of the interactions that urbanization can affect are interactions between hosts and parasites. And just to give a little bit of context, even though I've already chatted a bit about parasites in general, parasites, just to clarify, are species, are like usually like small species that take resources from another organism, and the duration of this like process of taking resources is like relatively like long, and it has the potential to cause harm. So, yeah. And host is the organism that the parasite is taking resources from. And so, interestingly, urbanization has variable effects on these interactions between hosts and parasites. Sometimes urbanization helps the host. Sometimes the urban hosts are doing better, as is the case of the red fox and their parasitic tapeworms. Red foxes in urban areas, they're healthier. And part of the reason is because they are less exposed to these tapeworm parasites because they switch their diets to eat more human junk food. Other times, urbanization affects the parasite. It helps the parasite do better in this interaction, as is the case of the interaction between bumblebees and their trypanosome parasites. Specifically, some research has found that the prevalence of trypanosomes, or the number of bumblebees that are affected by the trypanosome, is higher in urban compared to non-urban areas. And part of the reason why that happens is because the bumblebees in the urban area, or the species of bumblebee, is actually less healthy in the urban area. The parasite is doing better. So far, how are we doing? Good? Okay. A lot of parasites and a lot of host talk, so I want to make sure we're all doing good. Interestingly, however, we know the effects of that. We know that urbanization can affect host parasite interactions, and we know that humans introduce parasites to new areas. However, I've really tried to do a deep dive and see how urbanization can affect host parasite interactions when the parasite is introduced. And I really haven't found much on this topic. And so the question still remains, how does urbanization affect host parasite interactions when the parasite is introduced? A great place to study or to explore this question is located in the Galapagos Islands. For those of you who don't know, the Galapagos Islands is an archipelago that belongs to Ecuador. And this is a great place to study host parasite interactions for two main reasons. One, there's been recent urban development. The archipelago was like pretty much pristine until recently. And there's been rapid urban development in the past few decades because of ecotourism. Everyone wants to see the tortoises of the Galapagos. And there's also been parasite introductions. And so it really lends itself for like a perfect natural laboratory to explore how urbanization affects host parasite interactions. Alrighty, so to the protagonist of the story, or one of the protagonists. One of the parasites that has been introduced to the archipelago is this avian vampire fly. So the most recent like research suggests that it was introduced in the 1960s to the Galapagos, but it was identified as a problem for Darwin's finches in particular around the 1990s. And Darwin's finches are, for those of you who don't know, they are just, not only are they just very cool, just because they're cool, but they're these group of birds that are only found in the Galapagos Islands. You cannot go anywhere else in the world to find these Darwin finches. Yeah, you'll find another blackbird, but no, they're not Darwin's finches. And interestingly, I should have done a warning. Sorry, a warning. and and this parasite goes through different life stages. As an adult fly, it is not parasitic, but the female flies go around finding active bird nests where they go in and they lay their eggs in. Once the fly eggs are in the nest, the eggs hatch into these beautiful, beautiful maggots that start feeding on the blood and tissue of baby birds and their mothers. And once the maggots obtain sufficient blood meals, they pupate, so they become like this, similar to like a cocoon of a butterfly, and then the cycle continues. And that's the end of the presentation. um, so this parasite is extremely lethal, and in non-urban areas such as this one, it can cause up to 100% nestling mortalities. 100% nestling mortality. So it's incredibly lethal. And studies already suggest that if nothing is done to control this parasite, it will cause the extinction of even the most common finch species. So it's a huge conservation concern.
You should describe the pathology.
Oh, yeah. So,
because it looks like nipples, but birds don't have nipples.
Yeah. So, not nipples. So what we're seeing here, so as I mentioned earlier, the maggots feed on the blood and tissue of the baby birds. And so what we're seeing right here, those are like scars basically from the maggots feeding on the baby birds. And we see like scarring around the nostril area as well. And it's all a result of this vampire fly sucking the blood out of this baby bird. Interestingly, however, recent work by our lab has found that urban finches are doing better. They have fewer parasites, and as a result, they are surviving to leave the nest more frequently. And so, well, that is like fascinating in and of itself. Like, what? Urban birds are doing better? We were interested in the why. Like, why is this happening? Why are urban finches doing better? And so we've explored a couple of different explanations for why this might be happening. The first explanation that we looked into was related to the immune system of the birds. Specifically, maybe the urban finches have a stronger immune system. They are more resistant against the parasite compared to the non-urban finches. And after doing some work on that, we did not find that to be the case. Another possibility could have been related to the number of adult flies across these locations. So maybe the non-urban finches are sicker because there's just more flies in the environment compared to the urban area. Nope, we didn't find that to be the case. A third possibility could be related to the behavior of the fly itself. Specifically, maybe, yes, there are differences in the number of flies in the urban versus non-urban environment, but maybe the number of times that these flies visit the nest differs across locations. And lastly, a fourth, and this is not a comprehensive list of all the possible explanations, but a fourth possibility could be related to some sort of self-fumigation happening. So maybe the birds in the urban area are adding something to their nest that is killing off the parasites. These last two potential explanations had not been explored before I got to the lab and will be the focus of the rest of my talk. How are we doing so far? I think it's moderate. Oh my God, so much talking.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you have like so you said that before there was like a 100% mortality or like fetal mortality or like, is that how you describe it? Like before when they die before they leave the nest?
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's, wait, can you repeat your question?
Oh, sorry. So like what's the percentage mortality in like an urban setting? Because like you said that in before the urban setting is 100. Like what is it like afterwards?
In the urban setting, it's approximately 50%, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And with like stats and stuff, we found that to be like a significant difference across locations. But in the non-urban, yes, it's like 100% in some years. Does
And
that
if
answer your
they're
question?
if they're not parasitized,
Mhm.
the survival's about 85%
Okay.
in both sides.
Mhm.
I have great questions. Alrighty. So let's dive into this fly behavior stuff first. And I guess I want to start with an anecdote. Oh my goodness, I have to move this a little bit. So I guess the reason why we became interested in this idea of fly behavior was based on this observation from the field where we would go around visiting nests to check if there are eggs, check if there are like baby chicks. And these urban mamas, they would just stay in the nest so long. You could get like right in front of the nest and mom would not leave whatsoever. Whereas in the non-urban area, they would hear a little bit of like, what is it, rustling? Did I make up that word? Like movement of leaves, and they would just leave the nest very quickly. And after observing this, we were kind of like, okay, so I guess, yeah, moms being in the nest longer makes them better parents, but how could that influence this interaction with the fly? And after doing some deep diving to some papers, we found that in both Darwin's finch species and in flycatcher species, the wait, let me rephrase. Flies visit nests when the nest is empty. So when there are no parent birds in the nest. And so that observation or those findings really made us wonder, okay, so flies are visiting the nest when parent is not there. Could urban finch females prevent flies from accessing their nest to lay eggs in by just staying in the nest longer? Could that be what's happening in the urban area? And so I chatted about this with my advisor, and she was like, "Yeah, fine, we can go to the Galapagos." No, I'm kidding. It was more than that, but we we went down to the Galapagos Islands in 2025, and we monitored the nesting activity of small ground finches at this urban and non-urban site, as showcased by the different icons. And I showed a picture of this in the previous slide, but just to kind of walk through the details of each site. Our urban site is this town of Puerto Vaquerizo Moreno. It has many buildings, many restaurants. It's like the touristy spot in the island. And so there are permanent human populations there, and also all the tourists, or most of the tourists, stay in this town. Our non-urban site is this location of Jardín de las Opuntias. It doesn't have any human-built structure. The only structure, you could call it, is a trail that people use to access a beach. but there are no buildings, no restaurants, nothing of the sort. Once the first baby bird hatched, we placed these cameras through the roof of the nest to monitor all nesting activity or all nest activity inside the nest. And this is just a clip of what our videos look like. These are some baby birds that are being annoyed by this fly that is like probably laying some eggs. I'm really driving this video. You tell that I like it a lot. Once the baby birds left the nest or they died, we collected the nest and broke it apart in order to count all of the different parasites. What's really cool about this system is that unlike other parasites, the vampire flies are, is it free living? Free living? They're not, they don't like latch on. So they're free living. They don't latch on to the host forever. And so once these birds leave the nest, the nest material is not reused. So the parent birds are not reusing the nest. So we can just like count how many parasites were affecting the baby birds at any time. And believe it or not, the field work, the nest dissections weren't the hardest part of it all. Now, a group of amazing undergraduate scientists are going through each of the videos and collecting the behavioral data. And specifically, we are quantifying how many flies are visiting the nest in order to get fly entry rate per hour. And we are also quantifying how much time these finch mothers are spending in the nest. Alrighty, so I will be showing some very preliminary results. And all of the data I will be showing is from nests that had newly hatched chicks. So it was that first day where we placed the camera. Alrighty, so do flies in the non-urban area visit nests more than in the urban area? On the x-axis, we have our two sites, our non-urban and urban. And on the y, we're looking at fly entry rate, or the number of fly visits per hour. And we're already observing this pattern where the number of flies visiting is higher in the non-urban compared to the urban site. And so that's exciting that we're already seeing this like really cool pattern showing up. And I guess the follow-up question, right, is the behavior of females mediating this difference in fly entry rate? And what I'm going to be showing right now is just a few data points from nests at the non-urban site. So we're not getting at the comparison yet. We haven't gotten that data yet, but yeah, just a few data points from the non-urban site. And just to like orient ourselves, in the x-axis, we're looking at the proportion of time that these finch mothers are spending in the nest, and the y-axis again, fly entry rate. And we're seeing this like very like clean, you could say, negative relationship where the more time that mom spends in the nest, the fewer flies that are going in. And so could the behavior of mom be mediating differences across locations? That's TBD, but the preliminary data already is like kind of exciting. So I'm looking forward to what we find. All right, so do adult fly visits differ across locations? The answer is yes, maybe, hopefully. But yeah, again, it's all preliminary, so we will figure out once we finalize the data if this pattern persist. Now let's move on to this fumigation stuff. Let's talk a little bit about why we cared about the materials that finches were incorporating into their nest. Part of the reason why we care about the nest materials to begin with is because urban finches love trash. And we found this pattern across years where all urban finches incorporate the trash into their nest. And so what you're seeing here is this in this picture is just all the trash that was found from a single nest. So this is just from one nest. And you can see some plastic, some, what is it, like the cover of like a beer, like the paper thing that covers the beer, like right here. And some hair. And what the material that really stood out from all of these was these cigarette butts. We found cigarette butts in the nest of Darwin's finches. And when we saw that, we were like, why are they like cigarette butts in there? And so once again, we did some deep diving on the literature, and we found that house finches and house sparrows in Mexico reduce the number of parasites in their nests by incorporating cigarette butts. Right? It's wild. And so we were like, whoa, okay. But the question now is like, but like, why? Like, what about the cigarette butt could be helping these birds? And there isn't one clean answer, because cigarettes contain, I think it's like 4,000 different chemicals in them. But the one that really stands out is nicotine. Yes, like the very same nicotine that is addicting and causes addiction, blah, 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 is also a commercially used insecticide. It is used in crops to get rid of pests. And so it is possible nicotine is also affecting the survival of these parasites. And so now the question is, can the tobacco found in cigarettes kill vampire flies? And most importantly, the $1,000,000 question, are urban finches, hi, you want to join us?
I will.
We're talking about cigarettes.
For cigars.
So yeah, I guess to kind of bring you on the same page, we were interested in seeing, you're gonna be like, what? Whether the tobacco from cigarettes was affecting the survival of parasites, and furthermore, whether finches in the urban area were fumigating basically their nest by incorporating cigarette butts. And so once again, we went down there to the Galapagos, and we monitored the nesting activity of a couple of different finch species. And we again monitored their survival until they left the nest or they died. And we collected all of the different maggots found in the nest. And we also weighed all of the cigarette butts that were found. And this is where the fun began. We started a little experiment because we wanted to see if the tobacco was directly affecting the survival of these maggots. And we basically did one of 3 experimental treatments. We exposed the maggots to either water, diluted tobacco, or concentrated tobacco. And so this is a picture of like how the maggots were exposed to the treatment. They were placed in these little tubes. And all the tobacco that was used for the experiment was obtained from Marlboro Reds. It was kind of like funny to go to like a supermarket and be like, can I get some Marlboro Red 100s? 100s, please, because I wanted to keep the brand and the type consistent. And once the maggots were placed in their treatment, we basically monitored their development all the way until they reached the adult fly stage. But for simplicity of this presentation, right, we're going to keep it short and sweet. I will just talk about this idea of enclosure success. So how many of these parasites survive to become an adult fly? So from the pupal stage to the adult fly stage. Alrighty. So what do you guys think? Can tobacco kill vampire flies?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're right. We found that both the diluted and concentrated treatment had significantly lower success at reaching that adult fly stage. And there was over 70% success of the flies in the water treatment to reach adulthood. So yes, tobacco is affecting their survival. Now, when we look at how many nests in the urban area had cigarette butts, I'm going to be showing you a pie chart. And oh shoot, I should have done different colors. But basically, the dark blue is showcasing the nests that had cigarette butts. And the teal color is the nest that did not have cigarette butts in the urban site. And we found that only 11% of nests in the urban area had cigarette butts. And so we were like, not many, but there's still maybe those 11% of nests are fumigating with cigarette butts. And so that brings us to our $1 million question. Do urban finches fumigate their nests with cigarette butts? And I guess I would just want to showcase what we would predict, or what we predicted, if cigarette butts were indeed like reducing the survival of parasites and reducing the number of parasites. Parasite abundance is the number of parasites. So we would have found like this clean, like negative relationship where nests with more cigarette butts would have had fewer parasites. And when we look at the observed data, same thing, cigarette butt mass in the x-axis and parasite abundance in the y, we don't really see a pattern stand up. And so that suggests to us that no, that the urban finches are not fumigating their nest with cigarette butts. And so that brings again the question, like, why is this working for the house finches and the house sparrows, but not working for Darwin's finches? And so when we take a look at the house finches and the house sparrows, we see that it takes approximately 17 cigarette butts before they see a decline in the number of parasites in their nests. I guess let me ask the room. How many cigarettes do you think house finches, Darwin's finches, put into their nest?
Like 5.
4.
We're getting 5, 4. Any other dibs?
7.
7. They put half. They put on average half of a full cigarette butt. And so maybe they're just not incorporating enough cigarette butts to effectively reduce the number of parasites in their nests. And there could be many reasons for why this may happen. Maybe they don't like cigarette butts. They don't like adding cigarette butts to their nests. Or maybe the Galapagos is just too clean and there are not that many cigarette butts available. The Galapagos Islands is like, it's very regulated in terms of like how many people can visit and the cleanliness of the archipelago, because they are trying to keep it as pristine as possible. So that's, I guess, to give some background of why we think it's cleanliness. And so I guess just to tie it all together, we see this difference in the number of flight visits, or at least preliminary data suggests that. And we're seeing that, at least in the lab, tobacco affects the survival of these vampire flies, of these parasites. And so what now? Like, how can we use this information to help, or potentially help, Darwin's finches escape extinction? And I guess I want to bring this research to everyone's like brain. I don't know. And this research was conducted by Sarah Canuti. And basically, he or she found that finches can incorporate cotton treated with an insecticidal material into their nest. And when they do that, they effectively reduce the number of these parasites in their nest. So this right here is a dispensary that my advisor and her crew put up with this cotton that was treated with an insecticide. And this is the cotton incorporated inside the nest. And so finches can and do self-fumigate with materials that you put out. And I guess the question is, could tobacco be a more natural option? Because the insecticide that is used here, there aren't any like lethal effects to the birds, at least in small dosages, but it is like lethal, or sorry, it can be toxic to like waterways. And so it is not good for the environment in other ways. And so that brings again the question, could tobacco be a more natural solution? But no pun intended. How costly is cigarette butt or tobacco exposure to birds? And interestingly, the same researchers that found this pattern, looking at more cigarette butts and fewer parasites, also found that birds that were exposed to cigarette butts had more damage to their DNA. You know, toxic damage is like DNA damage, which in other species, it is associated with lower survival. And so I guess I will leave you all with the rhetorical question of, should we take our chances? Should we take our chances to use tobacco to kill off these parasites in the nest in order to save Darwin's finches? And it's so embarrassing. Yeah, I guess before I wrap up, I wanted to like say that this work was featured in a New York Times article. And so if you want to read it, and I was interviewed by the CBC Radio, where I got to talk about this work as well.
This was last week, everyone.
Wow.
We made her put this stuff.
Yeah, they made it.
It's really cool.
And last but not least, there's just absolutely no way I could have done any of this without all the people listed and without the funding sources. Oh my God, I need to make El Instituto front and center. Come on. Or let's put it here. So yeah, thanks to everyone listed here, and of course El Instituto for funding my work. Going to Galapagos is very expensive, so I'm very grateful that I got the fellowship. And that's all for me. Okay, so not too long.
Let me just say really quickly, I love as somebody who does a lot of large lecture classes and spends a lot of time doing PowerPoints, your graphic design is on point, and never apologize for maggot videos.
Oh,
A little cringy, but no, I mean really good, and it's as like in environmental history, we're finding a lot of like counterintuitive perspectives on like parasites and things like that, like epidemics, like the effects of epidemics and things like that. So I love that you're kind of finding these. I mean, the idea that urban development can actually help some species is just incredible, and it's great. And again, we're finding similar findings like in environmental history, like
Really?
completely different things, but we are finding these kind of counterintuitive these conclusions that kind of challenge our assumptions about urban versus rural kind of environments, right? So I think this is great work that I can see how it can kind of work for other things. Specifically, I was wondering you found a correlation between the way that the behavior of the mothers and the infection rates, right? But how do you move from like correlation to actually to prove causation? I mean, how do you connect that? I mean, you haven't yet, right? But what would that look like? Like, what kind of evidence would you need to kind of show that there's an actual connection between those things?
Yeah, definitely. So what the graph that you're referring is just looking at the number of adult flies entering. But what we're planning to do is use some structural equation modeling
Okay.
to kind of get closer to that causality
Mm-hmm.
Of it all. But yeah, you're right that those are all data that were observational data that were then with like the stats trying to like piece together to see if there is causality happening.
I was just curious because as somebody who knows nothing of the discipline, I'm just curious how you take that next step, which is kind of like the next step in the research, right?
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of wondering. I mean, I think it's just really interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could have like a cutout of a mama bird like or something. I mean, it'd be really difficult to experimentally manipulate mom's behavior,
Right.
but I guess you might be able to either figure out a standardized protocol where you catch her at a certain time and hold her with the camera playing, and then you kind of know when she goes back, or you would have to manipulate the nest in a way that the fly perceives mom in there when you've activated it, whatever that means.
I mean, the reason why I was asking is because that graph itself, that shows, to me, that's enough evidence, right? But of course, I know I am not, I'm curious to what are the standards of, how you prove that. So I guess with different experiments or something.
Lorraine has I get the inside scoop because she shows me some of the videos. She has videos of moms in the nest and the fly goes in, looks at the mom, and then leaves. So like there is like that might, maybe still be a correlation, but she has made the observation that the flies, they look at the mom and they're like, nope, not going in.
Yeah.
Or how many seconds was it? Like
No, go ahead.
Mom leaves how many seconds after until the fly enters? You've
Yeah.
been finding how many seconds? Like
So in 2024, I believe the average was like less than 2 minutes after mom left that flies would go in. But I would need to check with this with the bigger sample size. What's the average? Because there's been like more variation this time around with the bigger data set. So
I didn't know about that.
oh yes.
I don't remember that. You've been quantifying those data, right?
I've been writing in the notes.
Okay, because you could probably compare how, like, whether or not the fly goes in when mom's there versus not. So it would be more frequent that the fly would actually enter the nest if she's not there, I assume. And then when the mom's there, the fly's gonna turn around and be like, see ya. So that could be comparable data as well to piece together.
I don't think you could probably do this because Lorraine said that the finches are very sensitive, but if you put a stuffed animal bird in the nest
Yeah.
and see if the flies don't go in.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
they're
if it's like a
really
visual
good.
cue instead of
But
like
it's,
chemical.
I remember you saying that they're very sensitive
Yeah.
to disturbance.
I mean, with all this, like, I'm sold. Like, I think it's, you know, like my question is like, how exactly do you prove it without like to the centers of your field? Because I'm sold. I'm like, you convince me. You know, I mean,
Well, you should follow up because we don't always, the preliminary data suggests that this doesn't always happen, right?
Oh, with the negative correlation, you mean?
With regards to the perhaps the nestling age. Like,
Oh,
you might
yeah.
see this at certain ages of the nestling stage, but not others.
Yeah, so all the data points here are from like points in the nest stage where the chicks are like different ages. And so when we looked specifically at when chicks were what we call 0 days old, so they just hatched, there was a lot more variation in the number of flies entering and the proportion of time the mom was in there. And so it could be that mom's behavior also changes during the nestling period because as chicks get older, mom is more like, okay, they'll be fine, they'll be fine. So they don't spend as much time in there. And so that could also be influencing both the fly's ability to enter the nest and flies like cues, so like its perception of an active nest being there.
So I'm sorry, Miss Representative, I'm running all over the place.
Yeah.
So back in the 60s, my dad was experimenting adding proteins to plants so he could use it to protect hardwoods in South America, where they were growing hardwoods and they found that insects couldn't digest more than 3 proteins at the time. So they were adding an extra protein as a way to control depredation of insects of hardwoods. Is there any way to think about, I don't know, something similar in this case where you can sort of add something to some product, an extra protein? Right? I'm just speculating. Or is there any conversation along those lines of doing some sort of intervention that's non-toxic?
In order to kill the parasite? I don't think so. I don't think that there's been a conversation about, I guess, coming up with like a specific chemical that targets the.
But this is just genetic manipulation. It was just adding an extra protein.
People have talked about CRISPR as a way to edit the genome of the fly.
Yep.
Also, sterile insect technique is another idea that's been kicked around, but and it works with like screw worms.
Yeah.
But the operation involved is so massive that it's like it just would be too costly unless we found like a very affluent donor. But more recently, well, I shouldn't say more recently, over the past like 15 years, scientists have been trying to find a candidate predator of the fly on the mainland where the fly is native. And they found one, and it seems to be pretty specific to our parasite in the Galapagos. And so right now, they're in the process of getting approval to do some soft releases of this predatory wasp of the fly. And the idea of self-fumigation is kind of like this stopgap method that can be used in a very small area with only a few nests, whatnot. But we need a longer term solution, which is where CRISPR could come in, or sterile insect technique could come in, or biological control could come in. So it's great. I mean, we've been talking about this for so long.
Oh,
But it's, it's hard. These flies are everywhere in the island, so it's not like one island has it, it's spread everywhere. So yeah, it's a massive problem. That needs a massive solution.
my father was experimenting with this in the 60s,
Oh.
and the US Forest Service thought it was science fiction at the time. But I mean, they were just introducing an extra protein in the plant. And then they just planted and it spread along the way, and then insects would eat the leaf and they couldn't digest the extra protein. And that was a simple solution that didn't require much
That's
investment.
crazy.
But the US Forest Service thought at the time that it's science fiction, and they defunded the project.
Fortunately, the Galapagos is pretty progressive. We've already had successes with biological control without it having, other consequences. I mean, this is why it's taking 15 years to implement anything, because the park is very, very careful to
No,
not letting anything wreak havoc. But they were open to sterile insect technique and CRISPR. It's more
that's costly.
the cost and the infrastructure involved. And the fact that we just don't know a lot about the biology of the fly. I mean, Lorraine is one of very few people who are actually studying anything to do with like the behavior of the fly. Most of it's on the birds. And so without more knowledge of the fly, we can't come up with ways to like breed the fly, for example, for these reasons.
It's incredible how after 200 years, the Galapagos is still this experimental.
Yeah.
It gives us so much knowledge, right? The Galapagos. It's incredible.
Totally.
Right.
It's an awesome place.
Yeah. How would you answer that last question? I mean, just follow up on all of this. Like, what are the ethics of like introducing tobacco or something? Like, how would you answer that question? Let me throw it back at you.
That is so funny. Yeah, I made that rhetorical question to be provocative, but
The problem with bringing you brought it up, so now.
but no, I wouldn't place the tobacco right now before first checking how it affects the chicks and the female birds. We were having a conversation about this in lab meeting yesterday about what could be like what's toxic about the cigarette butt in the study that I mentioned with the genotoxic damage. Is it something in the cigarette butt? Is it something in the tobacco? Or is it something in the tobacco leaves? Like, where is the toxicity entering in the mix? And I actually had some slides prepared just in case you guys asked about that. And I don't have a concrete answer, but basically, part of what makes the cigarette butts toxic is these heavy metals. So the study with the genotoxic damage didn't nail down a specific thing in the cigarette butt that could be affecting the birds, but heavy metals in humans, they are carcinogenic, and so they interfere with cell division. And then I was like, okay, so is this unique to cigarette butts? But no, there are heavy metals found in the raw tobacco leaves. And there's differences in the concentrations of these heavy metals geographically, probably because there's heavy metals in the soil, and how much heavy metals depends on the amount of pollution. And so I guess long answer short, or yeah, sure. It's still very complicated, and we would still need to evaluate what are the health implications of using any of these different forms of tobacco for control of vampire flies. I don't know if that answers your question.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Hey.
Hi. I was just wondering about like the parental behavior of the birds, because like it was just curious if the reason why they're staying so long in the urban areas is because they might be like all the noise pollution and everything that is happening, like they see that as a threat to like their offspring and that's why they stay? Or is it because they have been able to start recognizing the flies and that's why they stay? Like, if you know anything about that.
Yeah, so I mean, urbanization, yes, it is stressful for species across the board, but ultimately they have to habituate. And so it could be that, I guess it's like, do you see the cup half full or half empty?
Mhm.
Is it that they're very scared of stressors in the urban environment? They're like, I don't want to leave the nest. Or is it that they just don't care about the stressor anymore? They're like, oh, there's a human right in front of me. And so it's probably like habituation or in part habituation happening to just urban living. And whether they can identify the fly and stay in the nest longer, that would be super cool to look into, but that would also involve some like experimental manipulation of parasites in the nest. So like maybe treating the nest with permethrin and seeing if moms spend more time in the nest when they are parasitized, when the nest is parasitized.
I have a question about like overall, like when you showed like the different pictures of like the urban town in the Galapagos versus like the rural setting, like I noticed like just how vastly different it is. Like there are cacti in the rural setting
Yeah.
versus like in the urban setting, it's a lot of buildings.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering like where do the birds like lay their nests like in the rural setting compared to the urban setting? And do you think that might have anything to do with how frequently these flies are like even approaching the nest in the first place, regardless of whether the mother is present or not?
That's a great question. Yeah, so you're talking about this picture. Here.
Yeah.
So finches predominantly build their nest in cacti across locations.
Mhm.
So the town has a bunch of like, I guess what you would refer to as like ornamental cacti where people have planted them in the urban site. And they also nest a lot in the urban site in different ornamental plants. And then on urban is mostly just in cacti. And in terms of whether that could affect, right, the fly's ability to like find nests, that was your question? Was that your question?
Yeah, like just like how often they even like find the nest in the first place.
Yeah, maybe there could be some sort of like even the pollution in the urban environment interfering with the fly's ability to locate nests. There's been studies with other insects that artificial light affects their sense of like orientation. And so yeah, like there is probably, if fly entry rate does differ, that there could be pollution influencing these differences in fly entry rate. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Be frank, if I didn't, let me know.
No, it did.
Okay.